Okay, so just a really quick video today. This is some old footage from about a month ago when I headed down to UWS for one of their VO2 max tests that they have down there. Now this is just serving as something of a baseline test just to see where I'm at, because I've been on antibiotics for about 6 months now. I was on antibiotics at the time of the test, but it's just to serve as a baseline. I really like to get a baseline test in before doing big blocks of training to see and measure just how much I improve. And hopefully in a couple months time, I'll be able to do another VO2 max test, compare it to this one, see how much I've improved and see exactly what the training I'm doing does to these metrics. So if you want to see my untrained VO2 max, all the metrics and the protocol we did, then stick to the end. But I will warn you, you're about to be jump scared because at the time I had a full head of hair. And just before we get into the video, if you want any help planning training, interpreting test results, or just any question regarding cycling training and how you can be improving faster, then click the link in the description. It'll take you to my one-to-one coaching offer and we can work together to make you the best cyclist possible. But now that that's out of the way, let's get into the video. Morning guys, we're here outside UWS. We've been to my favourite coffee shop. It's not actually, but Greg's. You always get cheap coffee in there. Brought a camera man with me. I've brought Callum with me.
Chief cameraman.
He's going to be filming this VO2 max test. I probably won't have much to say when I've got the mask on, but we'll see. We'll see what the results are saying to it. Could be an interesting test. Could be some room for improvement. But either way, it's going to be a baseline to serve before the rest of the winter. Yeah, to document the return to racing and see what we can do today, because I've not had a VO2 max test in over 2 years. So let's get into it. Okay, so basically we got down to UWS. It's a big building there. It's a great facility. Started getting a warm up in, 6 minutes LT1, 3 minutes LT2, and then did some VO2 max rev outs. I will say, I don't think I did nearly enough of a warm up. My legs felt a bit heavy and stale, I would say. So that's my advice. If you're doing a VO2 max test, I'd definitely do a bigger warm up than I did. But I'm also not sure if you can't have a fan during a VO2 max test or what, because I was absolutely sweating buckets in this lab. It felt like it was about 35 degrees in there. But you want to make sure you get a good warm up in, and if you can, use a fan. I don't know if using a fan affects the test results or the accuracy. I mean, this is a full lab VO2 max test. This isn't any VO2 master kind of done in somebody's shed. This is properly done, so we can trust these results, hopefully. You can see it was calibrated with the big air plunger down there on the shelf below the test itself. I was manually controlling the power on my Garmin, so 1 minute ramps of 25 watts per minute. I was using erg mode on the Wahoo kicker to control this, so fairly accurate power measurements. I also had the Quark on the bike, so we had 2 power measurements going on there. Just taking some baseline readings before we get started in the test. The test started off pretty easy, about 220 watts, but I hadn't done any high intensity training at this time. I hadn't done really any low intensity training either. I'd basically been off the bike for 3 or 4 months by this point due to the antibiotics, but it's good to get a baseline test regardless. I would always recommend, if you can, get a baseline test. Even if you think the results are going to be terrible, I'd recommend getting a baseline test, because you want to know where you started so you know exactly how much you've improved. If you just guess where you were, then maybe you got bigger improvement than you thought and you end up disappointed. But if you know exactly where you started, you know exactly where you finished, then you know how much you've improved. That's why I'd recommend doing it. 25 watt increments don't feel like much, but once you get to the end of the test, trust me, it starts to bite. When that erg mode starts kicking in at 450 watts, you know about it. Okay, so now we just have the printout that they send you after it. It's just outlining the protocol, the protocol was quite simple. 220 watts starting, 25 watts increasing every minute until failure. Some basic terminology there and my basic measurements. So I was 68 kilos on the morning of the test. Now, if I think back to when I was racing last year, my best weight there was about 63 and a half, 63 kilos on a good day. So I'm about 5 kilos overweight from race weight, and you can do the figures yourself if you want to figure out what my untrained race weight VO2 max would be. But I'm just going to put the VO2 max that was calculated on the day in this video here. So yeah, my height in centimeters. If we keep scrolling down, these are the actual metrics here. So it's 4.67, that's your absolute VO2 max. We've got the relative VO2 max is 68.76. Maximum power output, 450 watts. So 450 watts is the power step that I failed on. Bearing in mind, I've seen people on Instagram claiming they've got a VO2 max of 90 and they're failing on the same step as this. I won't name any names. Power to weight ratio on the day and my peak heart rate. So you can see we did get a maximal effort there. You scroll down and you see where your VO2 max lines up for your age group and if it's superior or good. So the final bit of information I'd say about my VO2 max test and protocol down at UWS is that it was a 30-second smooth test. Now that means there were some peak values there that don't get included into the final graph or in the final readout. Some peak breaths that were up around the 75, 76 VO2 max range. Because you weren't able to sustain that for long enough, that doesn't get included in the 30-second smooth test. Now that might explain why people on Instagram and athletes alike are claiming very high VO2 max tests. Yet when we look at the historical lab data, we don't see people with quite so high VO2 maxes. There's usually a lower reading in a lab than there is on a VO2 master or such like. So that was my VO2 max test, a bit of a baseline before I get into heavy training. I visited UWS, the team down there were all very helpful. The day went very smoothly, so I can't fault anything there. I will say that, and I'll flash up on screen now, direct calorimetry, so your fat max and where that relates to your LT1. Now there's no lactate measurements being done that day, but I'd done a lactate test a couple of weeks before that. This graph here will show you why knowing direct calorimetry can be quite useful for calculating things like fat max and how efficient you are in terms of fat utilization. As from my last video, there was a little bit of confusion as to if fat max was below or above LT1. This graph here clearly shows that it's below LT1. I also got sent at a later date my VT1 and VT2. Now VT1 and VT2 can sometimes be used as alternatives to LT1 and LT2, and depending on who you ask, depends on which one you think is more reliable for training and for data and such like. I tend to like to go off of lactate thresholds purely because I have a lactate meter and I feel I can replicate it. I also think that having seen my VT2 here, I'll put it on screen now, there is no way that I could hold 400 watts for 40 minutes. If I could, I'd probably be in the Tour de France right now. There is some mitochondrial activity that happens from antibiotics. Who can say whether or not this test was completely reliable, as I did it while I was on doxycycline, but my VT2 and LT2 definitely do not line up at the moment, I'll tell you that for free. So take that with a pinch of salt. But it does show that there is good potential there for future training adaptations and good potential there for an upper respiratory limit when it comes to my training. So hopefully within a year, I'll have a much higher VO2 max value so that I can get a much clickbaitier title compared to this video, and both videos get more views. But for now, you're just gonna have to look at a VO2 max of roughly 70, and hopefully you find something useful from this video, including the protocol, what to expect on the day of a VO2 max test, and how you can kind of interpret the results.